Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really quite stark. It's this collision course, you know. The administration seems to be, well, dismantling key parts of the economic safety net.
Right.
While at the very same time ramping up preparations for domestic military deployment on a pretty unprecedented scale.
It's a real paradox. On one side, you see this intense focus on, well, almost opulent projects.
Yeah.
Big construction, luxury items.
Yeah, that golden ballroom we've heard about.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, detailed plans for managing mass civil unrest. We're talking over 20,000 troops ready for deployment on U.S. streets.
And specifically timed ahead of the 2026 midterms.
Precisely. So the sources we're drawing on are quite diverse, but point in a, frankly, alarming direction.
What kind of sources are we talking about here?
We've got detailed Congressional Budget Office reports, the ones breaking down the healthcare cuts, specifics on changes to disability rules.
Okay.
Then there's news reporting on how inflation and these tariffs are really hitting people's wallets.
And the military angle.
That comes from Defense Department memos. Official directives outlining this nationwide military readiness plan. It specifically mentions civil disturbances.
So the documentation is pretty solid across the board.
It is. And what emerges is this picture of immense financial pressure being deliberately applied, it seems, to certain groups.
Yeah.
Working class Americans, specific regions.
And the military prep seems like, well, like they expect a reaction to that pressure.
It points directly to an expectation of significant political and social fallout. Blowback, essentially.
So our goal here for you listening is to connect these dots. It's not just policy A and policy B happening separately.
No, it's about understanding the interplay. How does tearing down the social contract relate to militarizing the domestic response?
What does it tell us about the country's stability as we head towards 2026? It feels like it's about more than just policies. It feels like anticipating a bracing point.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We really have to start with the economic foundation, the stuff that affects people day to day. And the most immediate crisis seems to be this Affordable Care Act cliff.
The health insurance cliff, yeah.
Yeah.
It's tied to the enhanced premium tax credits, the PTCs.
Right, those subsidies that help people afford marketplace plans.
Exactly. And they're set to expire at the end of 2025.
Which means open enrollment starting November 1st next year. People are going to get some serious sticker shock.
Oh, absolutely. Catastrophic sticker shock is not an exaggeration. The scale here is huge.
How many people are we talking about?
Over 20 million people currently get these credits. That's what, 93% of everyone on the ACA marketplaces?
Wow.
And the enhancements did two key things. First, they capped premiums at 8.5% of income.
Okay.
And second, they removed the income limit. So even folks making over 400% of the federal poverty level, sort of middle income by that definition, could get help.
And if those enhancements just vanish.
Well, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they project nearly 4 million more people will become uninsured by 2035.
4 million uninsured. That's bad enough.
But it's worse, actually. For the vast majority who keeps their insurance, their costs are projected to more than double on average.
More than double. That's the killer detail, isn't it? It's not just the uninsured. It's the massive cost shift onto families who thought they were covered. Middle-class families, people nearing retirement.
Exactly. And the numbers, when you look at specific examples, they are just devastating for household budgets.
Give us one of those examples. Make it real.
Okay, take a hypothetical couple. Let's say they're 60 years old, making about $85,000 a year. That puts them just over that 400% poverty level mark.
Right.
Under the current rules, with the enhancements, maybe they pay, say, $600 a month for their insurance.
Manageable, perhaps.
But if the enhancements expire, their estimated monthly premium jumps to nearly $2,650.
Wait, from $600 to over $2,600 a month?
Per month. That's an annual increase of about $24,500.
Good Lord. That's more than a 300% increase, like 300% increase.
So a 340% jump.
So you're basically forcing that couple to choose health insurance or, well, anything else. Retirement savings, their mortgage.
It becomes an impossible choice for many. And it's not just older couples. Take a family of four, maybe making $130,000.
Okay.
Their annual premium increase is estimated to be almost $13,000.
$13,000 just wiped out of their budget. These aren't super wealthy people.
No, they're working families. And suddenly, a huge chunk of their income is gone just to keep health insurance.
And the sources say this isn't evenly spread, right? Some states get hit much harder.
Yeah, the impact is geographically concentrated. It's worst in states where the underlying cost of healthcare is already really high.
Like where?
West Virginia and Wyoming are specifically mentioned. The underlying premiums there are just very high.
So what does that mean for our 60-year-old couple if they live in West Virginia?
Okay, this is where it gets truly astronomical. That same couple, 60 years old, $85,000 income, living in West Virginia. Right now, for a benchmark silver plan, they might pay around $7,200 a year with the enhanced credits.
Okay, still significant, but maybe doable.
If the credits expire, because they're over that 400% FPL cliff, they lose the 8.5% income cap entirely.
So they pay full price.
They pay the full unsubsidized rate in a high-cost state. Their annual premium skyrockets to over $54,000.
$54,000 for a couple making $85,000.
Yes, from about $7,200 to over $54,000. It's simply unaffordable. It essentially prices them out of insurance entirely.
In some of the most economically fragile parts of the country.
Precisely. It's a massive blow, targeted, intentionally or not, at specific vulnerable populations.
And this ACA cliff isn't happening in a vacuum. It's running parallel to major changes, or rather cuts, to Medicaid.
That's right. The other big pillar of the safety net, the administration's legislative package, the one nicknamed the Big Beautiful Bill, it's projected to slash federal spending on Medicaid, specifically in rural areas, by about $137 billion over 10 years.
$137 billion. And the impact on coverage?
The estimate is around 10 million people nationwide losing their insurance because of these cuts.
10 million more on top of the ACA impact.
And again, look where the pain is concentrated. It disproportionately hits the Deep South, states that rely heavily on Medicaid.
Like Louisiana.
Louisiana's a key example. In 2023, almost half the state's population was on Medicaid. They could lose up to $34 billion in federal funding over the decade.
$34 billion. And Mississippi.
Mississippi could lose up to $4 billion. These are states with significant health challenges and fragile economies already.
So it begs the question, why? Why implement cuts that seem designed to hurt these specific areas, many of which are, politically aligned with the administration historically, red states?
That's the strategic puzzle, isn't it? Is it just collateral damage from a broader push for, say, tax cuts elsewhere? Or is it more ideological?
What do the sources suggest?
The sources point towards a combination. It seems like an ideological restructuring of the federal-state relationship, pushing responsibility down, plus a reliance on states to just manage the fallout.
And there are new bureaucratic hurdles, too, right? Even for people who theoretically remain eligible.
Yes, that's a crucial mechanism. It's not just about changing eligibility rules. It's about making it harder to stay enrolled.
How so?
The law brings in new work reporting requirements, and people will have to verify their eligibility every 6 months instead of once a year.
Every 6 months. That sounds like a recipe for people falling through the cracks, especially in rural areas without easy internet access or reliable mail.
Exactly. It creates what's called administrative churn. People losing coverage, not because they aren't eligible, but because of paperwork issues.
Do we have estimates on that?
In Louisiana, researchers estimate that around 317,000 low-income residents could lose their Medicaid coverage, primarily due to these new administrative burdens. Missing a notice, failing to upload documents correctly, bureaucratic delays.
And when does this kick in?
Significantly, these new requirements start in 2027, after the 2026 midterm elections.
Convenient timing. So, if patients lose coverage en masse, what happens to the hospitals, especially rural ones? They're already struggling.
They face potential collapse. Many operate on razor-thin margins. Losing a huge chunk of their insured patient base is catastrophic.
But didn't they add some money? I remember reading about a $50 billion rural health transformation fund. Sounds like a lifeline.
It sounds like one, yes. It was definitely positioned as a sweetener to make the cuts more palatable. But the strings attached make it almost useless for plugging the immediate holes. CMS officials, including the Director of Innovation, were very explicit about this.
What did they say?
They stated flatly, this isn't a backfill of operating budgets.
So you can't use it to pay nurses or keep the emergency room open?
Nope. The money is strictly for reimagining healthcare.
Reimagining. What does that mean in practice?
It means funding things like AI chatbots, new data systems, telehealth infrastructure, and, sources noted, also things like implementing the presidential fitness test in communities or, bizarrely, adding new restrictions on food assistance access, somehow tied to health transformation.
That sounds disconnected from the immediate crisis of hospitals closing.
It's about forcing a market disruption. The thinking, according to one policy advisor quoted, is that propping up existing hospitals is throwing good money after bad. They want to prioritize insurgents, like tech companies over incumbents, meaning traditional hospitals.
So tech gets funded, but the local hospital might still close its doors.
That seems to be the potential outcome. The operational crisis for the 150-plus rural hospitals that have already closed since 2010. This fund doesn't address it.
Okay, so we have ACA and Medicaid. What about disability support? Social Security, disability insurance, SSDI. That's for people who've paid in but can no longer work due to injury or illness, right?
Correct. And it's another area facing significant proposed changes. The administration is looking to modernize the eligibility rules.
Modernize usually means cut in this context.
Often, yes. The main change is to almost entirely remove age as a significant factor in determining eligibility.
How did age factor in before?
Traditionally, under what are called the medical vocational guidelines, or the grids, it was acknowledged that it's harder for an older worker to adapt to a new line of work after a disabling injury, especially if they've done physical labor their whole life.
Makes sense. A 55-year-old coal miner with a bad back has fewer options than a 30-year-old office worker with the same injury.
Exactly. The grids gave more weight to age, particularly for those over 50, especially if they lacked higher education or easily transferable skills.
And the plan is to remove that consideration.
Largely, yes, to eliminate that specific help given to workers aged 50 and up.
Who does that hit hardest?
It directly targets aging, blue-collar workers, people in physically demanding jobs, mining, logging, construction, factory work, often without degrees beyond high school.
What's the administration's justification for saying a 55-year-old former logger can just find a new job?
The argument is that technology has changed since the grids were created in the 70s, that there are more non-physical job options now.
Like what? Did they give examples?
They did. The examples cited were things like driving for Uber or DoorDash. Sedentary work, supposedly accessible to more people.
Driving for Uber with a severe back injury. Or if you live in a rural area with spotty internet and no demand for ride sharing. That seems profoundly out of touch.
The disconnect is significant, yes. And the potential impact is huge.
How many people could lose benefits?
Initial estimates range from 830,000 up to possibly 1.5 million people losing eligibility over the next decade.
1 million people, potentially. And where are they concentrated?
Again, it disproportionately impacts certain states.
Yeah.
The ones with the highest reliance on SSDI benefits.
How many guess?
West Virginia, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama. Seeing a pattern here.
Yeah. Hitting vulnerable populations in specific, often red states. And losing SSDI has another knock-on effect, right?
Crucially, yes. If you lose SSDI, you also lose your pathway to Medicare before age 65. So it compounds the healthcare access problem we just talked about.
Unbelievable. And quickly, there was also something about SSI, supplemental security income.
Right, that's separate from SSDI. SSI is for the extremely poor who are disabled or elderly. There's a pending regulation expected to cut or eliminate SSI benefits for about 400,000 individuals. These are often people with profound disabilities, including children, in households with almost no other resources.
So across the board, health insurance via ACA, Medicaid, disability support via SSDI and SSI, we're seeing deep cuts targeting vulnerable groups, often concentrated in the South and Appalachia.
That's the picture emerging from the policy changes, yes.
Okay, so we've established this foundation of economic pain, cuts to healthcare disability, hitting working class folks, especially in certain regions. Now let's overlay the other side of the coin, rising costs and the optics coming out of Washington, the sense of disconnect.
Right, because the safety net cuts aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening while basic costs are going up for everyone. Tariffs, for instance.
Yeah, who's actually paying for those?
Well, analyses like one from Goldman Sachs estimate that consumers are bearing a big chunk of the cost, maybe 55% right now.
And potentially more.
Potentially rising to 70% if new tariffs get slapped on things like furniture or cabinets, which has been threatened.
So tariffs are pushing up prices. What about overall inflation? The administration keeps saying it's improving.
The data suggests it's still stubbornly high, up about 3% over the last year, according to recent figures. And sources calculate that the tariffs alone have added almost 0.5%, 0.44%, to the Fed's preferred inflation measure.
So costs are up. And this is hitting while other support is disappearing.
Exactly. Think about SNAP food stamps. Benefits lapsed for many during the recent government shutdown. So at the very moment food, utility, and housing costs are climbing, food assistance gets cut off. Then add the healthcare premium hikes and disability cuts on top. It's a perfect storm of economic pressure on the people least able to withstand it.
Which makes the administration's own spending priorities and activities look, well, starkly contrasting.
Stark is the word. The timing has been, shall we say, unfortunate from an optics perspective.
Like the Gatsby party.
Yeah, sources highlighted that. A great Gatsby-themed gala for major donors held right around the time SNAP benefits were lapsing because of the shutdown.
Not a great look.
Not great at all. It paints that awful picture, as one source put it, of a bubble of wealth, completely detached from widespread hardship.
And then there's the actual physical construction, the ballroom.
The Golden Ballroom Project, replacing the historic East Wing, a public space, with this massive, opulent ballroom.
And the press secretary actually said.
Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was quoted saying the ballroom project is the president's main focus right now.
His main focus. While SNAP is lapsing, costs are rising, a shutdown is looming.
That's the context in which the statement was made, yes. It's hard to ignore the symbolism.
How did the public react to that?
Not well. Polling shows something like 61% of Americans disapproved of the ballroom plan.
Why? What was the sentiment?
People saw it as building a Gilded Age playground for wealthy donors while ordinary folks are struggling, food bank lines are growing. It just reinforces that perception of being wildly out of touch.
And this apparent self-focus extends beyond the White House, right? To cabinet members.
We see examples, yes.
Yeah.
Like Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
What did she do?
During the government shutdown, sources detailed her department spending $200 million of taxpayer money on a pair of brand new, top-of-the-line Gulfstream G700 luxury private jets.
$200 million.
During a shutdown.
Yes. The justification was likely security and efficiency for her role, but the timing, while Coast Guard members were facing pay freezes, it looked like prioritizing personal comfort and luxury over the needs of her own agency's personnel. It feeds into this narrative of insulation. Which brings us to something else quite unusual. Top officials moving on to military bases.
This is a really curious development. We're seeing high-level civilian appointees, Defense Secretary Hegseth, Secretary of State Rubio, Stephen Miller from the White House staff.
Yeah.
They've moved into housing on military bases, like Fort McNair in D.C., residences traditionally reserved for very senior military officers.
Why are they doing that?
The official reason given is security threats against them.
Okay, maybe plausible, but
It's described by sources as highly unusual and unprecedented for civilian political appointees to do this. The effect is they are displacing senior military personnel and moving into these incredibly secure, taxpayer-subsidized homes behind military gates.
like Hegseth's place.
Right. Quarters 8 at Fort McNair. Sources describe it as this, rather extravagant historic home surrounded by Revolutionary War cannons, maximum military security, and he's paying a subsidized rent, around $4,600 a month for it.
So if you're building a golden ballroom, cutting safety nets for the masses, and your top people are literally moving inside military fortresses.
It paints a picture, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests they anticipate needing that security. It feels like a strategic retreat behind walls.
A physical manifestation of bracing for something. Likely bracing for the fallout from their own policies, which leads us directly to the military preparations.
Okay, this is where it gets really unsettling. We've talked about the economic pressure, the disconnect. Now, the administration's response, it's not, let's fix the safety net, it's something else.
It's prepare for the reaction. The core piece of evidence here is the directive from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth about Quick Reaction Forces, QRFs.
Quick reaction forces, what are they?
He ordered the National Guard in all 50 states and territories except D.C., which already has a specialized unit to establish these QRFs.
For what purpose?
The directive explicitly states they are for civil disturbances and riots.
Civil disturbances, okay. And the scale and timing are important here.
Absolutely critical. This isn't a small, localized plan. It's nationwide. Over 23,000 troops in total.
23,000?
Usually around 500 per state. And the deadline for them to be fully operational, January 1st, 2026.
Right before things really heat up for the midterms.
And Hegseth himself confirmed the timeline extends further. He stated, these QRFs, trained in crowd control, would be deployed across all 50 states by April 2026.
Deployed by April 2026.
Yeah.
And they need to be ready fast.
Very fast. The mandate requires them to be able to deploy a quarter of their force within just 8 hours.
8 hours.
And the full unit within 24 hours. It's about rapid response capability, nationwide, simultaneously if needed.
What kind of training are these Guard troops getting? Crowd management sounds kind of vague.
The specific course is called the Inter-Service Non-Lethal Individual Weapons Instructor Course.
Okay.
Early parts focus heavily on crowd management techniques and domestic civil disturbance training. They learn, and I'm quoting here, the proper use of baton and body shields.
Riot gear, basically.
Standard riot control equipment, yes. And then there's intermediate training on non-lethal weapons. Tasers, pepper spray.
This feels different from the Guard's usual role in, say, natural disasters. This level of standardized nationwide training specifically for domestic crowd control.
It's highly unusual, yes. It suggests anticipation of widespread, simultaneous, multi-state unrest, something far beyond typical local protests.
And critics see this as...
Critics are alarmed. They see this QRF plan, nationwide deployment, crowd control focus, confirmed by Hegseth for April 2026, as basically an attempt to create and normalize the kind of national militarized police force.
Blurring the lines between military and civilian law enforcement.
Exactly. Using the military or the Guard under federal impetus for roles traditionally handled by local police, but on a national scale.
And these preparations for unrest are happening alongside a real focus on the 2026 elections themselves, aren't they? Trying to change the rules.
Yes, the two seem to be proceeding in parallel. The administration is making very clear moves to assert control over the electoral process before November 3rd, 2026.
Like what?
Well, the president has renewed his attacks on mail-in voting. He's even threatened to try and ban it via executive order, though the legality of that is highly questionable.
Right.
And his Justice Department has demanded voter registration data from most states. They say it's to search for ineligible voters.
How have states reacted to that?
Mostly with pushback. State election officials from both parties have called it federal overreach. There are lawsuits challenging it. It's seen as an attempt to intimidate or interfere with state-run elections.
And actual federal personnel are being deployed differently, too.
Yes, that's another significant shift. The DOJ is sending federal election monitors to polling places, but not in the usual way.
How so?
Traditionally, monitors went to places, often in the South, under the Voting Rights Act, to prevent discrimination against minority voters.
Oh.
Now, they're being sent to polling locations in blur states like New Jersey and California, specifically at the request of local Republican parties. And the stated focus isn't voting rights access anymore, it's ballot security.
So, the mission has flipped. From ensuring access to scrutinizing the process itself in Democratic areas requested by Republicans.
It signals a profound change in the federal government's posture towards local elections. Less about protection, more about investigation or potential intervention based on partisan requests.
And adding to the concern, there are appointments being made. People with histories related to election denial now in key security roles.
That's causing huge friction. You have individuals appointed to roles at DHS or CISA, the cybersecurity agency involved in election security, who have previously promoted election falsehoods or were involved in challenging results.
Like Heather Honey or Marcy McCarthy.
Those are names mentioned in the sources, yes.
Yeah.
People with documented histories now in positions responsible for election integrity or communication.
How are state election officials reacting to having these people as their federal counterparts?
They're alarmed. They feel, according to sources, that the federal government is now targeting election officials rather than supporting them. There's a sense of withdrawal of trust and partnership.
So the very agencies meant to help states secure elections are now viewed with suspicion by those states.
That's the dangerous dynamic. State officials rely on federal intelligence and support to counter threats, cyber attacks, disinformation. But now they feel the support is compromised or politicized.
What does that mean for actual election security in 2026?
It creates vulnerability. Arizona's top cyber official was quoted saying, CISA employees want to help, but the agency seems directionless or under-resourced for the task. His quote was, "It feels more like every state for themselves."
Every state for themselves, while federal monitors are scrutinizing their polls and QRFs are preparing for unrest.
It suggests the federal apparatus is potentially weakening election security infrastructure through neglect or political interference while simultaneously preparing for the potential fallout.
Okay, let's pull back for a second. We've laid out the economic pain, the cuts, the tariffs. We've seen the administration's disconnect, the luxury spending, the move to military bases, and now the massive preparation for civil unrest and the focus on controlling the 2026 election. To really grasp why this combination is so potentially explosive, we need to talk about the bedrock idea of the social contract.
Right, the fundamental, often unwritten agreement between the people and the government.
Where does that idea come from?
It goes back centuries to Enlightenment thinkers. You have Thomas Hobbes, who basically argued life without government is nasty, brutish, and short. So people give up some freedom for security.
Yeah.
Then John Locke refined it. He said people consent to be governed in exchange for the state protecting their fundamental rights: life, liberty, property.
And crucially, Locke added a condition, didn't he?
Yes. The kicker is, if the government fails to protect those rights or actively violates them, the people have the right, maybe even a duty, to alter or abolish it.
And the American system with popular sovereignty is built on that idea. Power comes from the people, government serves the people.
Theoretically, yes. But the policies we're seeing described in the sources, they seem to be stress testing that contract to its absolute limit.
How so?
Look globally. Studies show that when democracies fail to deliver basic prosperity and social progress, things like healthcare, education, a sense of security, popular support for democracy itself declines.
People lose faith.
They lose faith.
Yeah.
They become more open to authoritarian alternatives that promise order or results, even at the cost of freedom. When a government spends lavishly on ballrooms while cutting healthcare for millions, it sends a powerful message.
A message that the contract is being broken, that the government isn't holding up its end of the bargain.
Precisely. It erodes trust. It suggests that government is serving a select few, not the collective good.
The sources mentioned Gen Z protests as a warning sign.
Yeah, that was an interesting parallel drawn. Protests in some parts of the world where young people are literally chanting things like, "We want hospitals, not stadiums."
A demand for basic public services over prestige projects.
Exactly. It's described as a canary in the coal mine for rising inequality and frustration with government priorities when people feel their essential needs are ignored in favor of opulence or militarization.
They push back.
They push back. And if the government doesn't respond to those legitimate demands for basic services, it risks fueling exactly the kind of resistance and unrest it seems to be repairing the QRFs for.
This also brings up the idea of shared responsibility. The sources suggest this situation isn't just one person or party's fault.
Right. There's an argument made that the current political environment, the one that rewards conflict and division, is something the whole society has contributed to.
No.
By collectively failing to address deep-seated inequalities in education, housing, opportunity. These created the divisions that populist anger could exploit.
And maybe by how we consume information.
That too. Rewarding sensationalism, conflict-driven media with our attention, letting critical policy debates get drowned out by the daily outrage cycle. Essentially allowing the foundations to crumble while we're distracted by the noise.
It's a bleak assessment of collective failure.
It is. And it leads to an even darker possibility raised in the material. The possibility that a large enough segment of the population might actually reject efforts to fix things. That driven by resentment or mistrust or just a desire for disruption, they might choose division and chaos over constructive solutions.
Actively working against repair.
Overriding any sense of shared responsibility or collective good. If that's the case, then reasoned arguments calls for accountability.
Yeah.
They might just fall flat.
Which, again, seems to be the scenario the military preparations anticipate. A breakdown not just of policy, but of the social fabric itself.
That appears to be the grim underlying assumption, yes.
So let's try to bring this all together. What this deep dive seems to show is a deliberate strategy unfolding.
It appears that way.
You have the creation of significant economic hardship, the ACA cliff, the Medicaid cuts, the SSDI changes, tariffs, all hitting working-class people, older people, disproportionately in red states.
Yes.
At the same time, you have the administration projecting this image of, frankly, indifference, opulence, the ballroom focus, cabinet perks, leaders moving onto military bases, a profound disconnect. And then the response. Not addressing the hardship, but preparing for the backlash.
A massive, unprecedented mobilization. Hegseth's QRF directive. 23,000 National Guard troops trained in crowd control, ready for domestic deployment across all 50 states by April 2026.
Just ahead of the midterms, while simultaneously maneuvering to control the election process itself through DOJ actions and appointments.
It all lines up. The administration seems to be clearly anticipating major civil unrest, potentially on a scale larger than anything we've seen recently.
It really forces you to think about the basics, political philosophy meeting harsh reality.
Which brings us to the final thought. If the absolute core of the social contract is the state providing security, protecting life, liberty, property in exchange for citizens obeying laws, what does it mean when the state itself actively removes essential securities? When it takes away affordable health care, disability support, food assistance, the very things that provide basic stability for millions.
Knowing it will cause instability.
Knowing it will likely cause immense hardship and unrest. And then, what does it signify when that same state simultaneously builds a massive nationwide military force specifically designed and trained to manage the civil unrest that its own actions are almost guaranteed to provoke?
Is the state preparing to manage the consequences of breaking its own contract?
That's the terrifying dynamic. Preparing for the storm, it seems to be helping create. That's the question you need to grapple with as we look towards 2026.